Hello, hello, friends. Welcome back to Cubicle to CEO. I am so excited to be joined by a returning guest who is also a dear friend, Leah Jean. If you have not heard her previous episode on our podcast, we're going to link it below. I think it's going to provide a little more background color and context to the conversation we're having today around IP. I'm also going to formally introduce Leah in just a moment. But Leah, welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's always fun to be interviewed by you, Ellen.
Thank you. Well, it is always a joy to have returning guests because I feel like we get to continue to follow your journey. And last time we chatted, you were actually only really a few months into the IP licensing model that we're going to cover more in depth here. And I think you had given us kind of the results of the first 3 months of your venture into that. Today, we're going to be able to step back and look at the entire 12-month experience. And then from there, this is kicking off our series on IP and how different entrepreneurs are approaching their IP. Leia's case study today is going to be more focused on the licensing side from someone who is licensing IP that's already been created by another entrepreneur. And then, I think the cool part of your case study, Leia, is that the funds that you were able to earn from this IP venture kind of helped launchpad you into some of your more recent ventures. So, anyways, we won't get too ahead of ourselves just in this moment. For those of you who are meeting Leia for the first time, she is a former freelance advertising copywriter turned entrepreneur in the online course industry. That's the IP case study we're talking about today. And now brick and mortar. So Leia actually co-founded Agencia-Atlantica. I'm probably saying that wrong, so you're going to have to correct me. Anyway, she co-founded Agencia-Atlantica, where she and her partner own Airbnbs, manage short-term rentals for clients across Canada and Brazil. And they also operate a 14-bedroom inn in Quebec, and they've developed condo hotel buildings, all using creative financing strategies with minimal down payments and a focus on building equity. So, you are doing a lot. We're going to get into the real estate side later in this conversation. But for now, let's start with the IP piece. So, just a little bit of background. You basically decided to license this IP for a proven star offer. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of how you found this offer and why did you decide to go the licensing IP route rather than creating something of your own?
So at that point, I was what I I like to call a babypreneur. I was a very, very young entrepreneur because before that, I had been a copywriter in an agency for 4 years. And when I quit, I became a freelancer, which is not really the same as being an entrepreneur because as a freelancer, you're on call. Basically, you just make yourself known from agencies. They ask you, hey, are you available for like a short mandate or whatever? And then you say yes or no. Then I trained myself to become an online business owner in the industry of online courses because that was the most available to me at the time. And as women, especially, I think we are really good at psychology, knowledge, teaching, most probably. And so it felt really accessible to me to start with. So I had been doing that. Like I launched my first online course. And then 16 months in, I just thought, what if I change the formula and actually switch to a higher ticket? Because the first one was like a low medium ticket, right? And so I was making the calculus and the math and thinking to myself, what if I launch another offer that had less students and good profit, good revenue as well, because the monthly ticket, monthly payment was a little higher, And I like ideas and I like treating ideas as assets, which is the whole point of an IP because it stands for intellectual property.
Mhm.
So basically, something that was created that works could be a patent, copyright, a recipe, or in my case, a method
Yes.
could be taken and then used as an offer in of itself. And I myself was part of that method, like of the program that I was really interested in teaching on a different market. And especially because that program closed, so it was no longer available. And in my case, there's also this component of teaching it to another language, to a different market, which does add a layer of complexity. But it was my leverage at that moment. And so taking a star offer was interesting to me because I thought it will help me kickstart my growth. Basically, I know from experience that what takes the longest is a time to market. Basically, being a good product market fit. So you need to understand what the market needs, what offer could be sold like in a glimpse,
Mhm.
and sometimes it takes a bit of time. You have an idea, you tried something, then you get feedback from your first client, but then you have to adapt and it's not exactly what they were wanting, et cetera, et cetera. And in that case, I knew because I was a witness and I was also somebody who used the method and it worked for me and I knew it worked for many other people. So I was like, I'm sold on the method. I know it works.
Yes. Yes. And as someone who was also previously in that program many years ago, I completely concur. It made such a difference in the program that I was scaling at the time before we retired it about 4 years ago. But the program, just for those of you who are curious, called Recurring Profit. The premise was that it helped course creators and membership owners scale their programs to their first $1 million in revenue. And, our mutual friend Haley founded it. And then Leia, if you're curious more about that translation work and how she was really able to focus on bringing this IP to the French market, or I should say French speaking market, then again, refer back to her previous interview on our show, linked in the show notes. We go into much more detail about the approach there and how you can kind of think about your IP in a similar way on either side, whether you're the one licensing your IP or whether you are the licensee looking to adapt someone else's IP. So we won't get into that today, but definitely worth a listen if you're at all curious about that process. Now, Leah, when you went to go negotiate this licensing model or this licensing term, was it originally set for just 12 months? Was that like a trial window or did you negotiate other timelines and then adjust it to 12 months? How did that process go? And then also, just for those who are not super familiar with licensing, how does the deal structure actually work? Is it like you pay an upfront fee and then percentage commission on any sales that come through using this IP, or is it structured differently?
I love this question because actually, this is where you can get very creative. And the rule is that there is no rule in negotiations. I mean, the only rule that there is the law, like stay
Right.
legal. um, but everything can be negotiated. So basically, in that case, there are two models that exist basically royalty based models or franchise models. I use the first one because it did not require for me any upfront payment.
Mm,
So we agreed on a percentage of my revenue. And actually, there was no pressure on the said revenue, meaning there's no minimum revenue I need to make for the deal to be able to continue. Basically, it's just I start, I do what I can because it's all bootstrapping. I'm starting from zero.
yeah.
And then there's a revenue share that applies. And in our case, actually, I did not negotiate. This is the interesting part because I don't know, I didn't think of it. Like I said, I was very green to business in general. And also I felt like the person in front of me, I trusted that person. And so I also wanted the revenue share to be interesting enough to her so that she felt the will and, the kind of the momentum to actually support me as well. And there were also coaching calls included in the deal. But basically, in my case, it was a 20% revenue share
Mhm.
that was lowering as my revenue was growing. So starting at 20%, and then after a certain amount of yearly income or monthly income, actually, 18%, and then 16%.
Gotcha.
And now that I think about it in retrospect, I would actually negotiate something a little different, which is a gradually increasing revenue share plateau, and then decreasing again. Basically, I would have started around probably 10 to 12%.
Yeah.
Why? Because this will allow the licensee to actually get paid, like to pay themselves, which is important because they need to be serene, they need to be good.
Yeah.
and also have some kind of leverage for like growth, marketing, if anything, like just investing a little bit of things in the beginning to actually kickstart the offer. Because you're really just taking the IP and launching it by yourself in
Mhm.
your market versus having a franchise where you basically license or buy a whole business structure, a brand name, operation, processes, recipes, everything you can think of, and you just like take it and apply it somewhere else, but you actually lean toward like on top of something very structured, right?
Yeah. That's so interesting, actually, that you bring up that franchise model because having recently gone through an acquisition myself for a very different type of business, brick and mortar, we actually had a conversation around franchising and that entire model. And what I learned is that in a franchise model, one of the legal documents, at least in the United States, that franchisors have to provide to potential franchisees is this document called an FDD. I think it's a franchise disclosure document. I believe that's what it stands for, but it's this very extensive legal document that on the franchisor's side actually costs potentially tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to create. So it's actually quite capital extensive too on the IP creator side to go that franchise route. So I understand what you're saying with like the royalty route just made a lot more sense on both ends, I'm sure, for simplicity and efficiency to get things off the ground. But I love that bonus tip that you gave for anyone thinking of following a similar model to have that royalty rate start lower, ascend to a certain point, and then again decrease once certain revenue milestones are hit. So super helpful. Again, one of those things where it's like you just wouldn't know that unless you've gone through it yourself. So that's why I'm so grateful for people like you who are willing to share transparently their own experiences, so that we can all benefit from that. Now, another thing I think is interesting is you mentioned that there was actually one thing the seller couldn't transfer. Can you expand on what you mean by that and how did you fill that gap?
So basically, you are buying the right to use an idea,
Hmm.
but you are not buying another business. So you don't have access to the back end. It's like having the recipe for cake, but maybe not all the secret like behavior and ingredients that they can put into to make it work and to make the magic work. So you still have to go there and like do your errors, like make errors basically. I know in my case, for example, I was stuck for a long time not understanding why the offer was not performing as well as I intended. And after retrospect, I understood that my leads were not really qualified.
Mm,
That the offer and the result of the offer, in my case, it was not reach your first million. It was like more reach your first 10K months. And self doubt creeped in. And at the same time, I was like, I really want to make sure that I can promise a result that I have achieved. And my personal experience as an entrepreneur was not the same as Haley, who had like reached and achieved like millions in revenue, right? So, like, my promise needed to be also kind of related to my own what I can teach because I've tried and know for sure that I can help you get there as well. So all this, this is why mentorship could be part of the deal. And in our case, we had like a monthly calls, but there's some things like for sure, like the person who licensed the IP doesn't not want to share, or maybe is not interested in sharing, or is just not how the deal is structured, which is fine, you know.
right.
But then you need to actually surround yourself with an equivalent. So for me, things shifted when I actually started my relationship with my boyfriend, who is a very, very seasoned entrepreneur. And then he made me reflect on these questions. Oh, you need to break your existing circle of people around you, your community. Like, you need to break that. And the right strategy to do so would have been to go into ads right away.
Mm,
Small budget, but actually breaking the community and the organic pool, let's say, and going into different kind of leads to be able to actually verify that it was not an offer problem. It was just like a profile of ideal client problem from the beginning.
yeah. No, I think sometimes that outside perspective is so helpful, and especially it's it's great when you finally realize, okay, I know what the problem is, but it's a solvable problem, right? Like that lead qualification piece, or maybe not relying on your organic audience as the right pool, like you said, to source these leads from. I think once you understand that, everything can change. I do want to look a little bit at your numbers over that year. In total, your revenue was $80,378.90. Again, for those of you who are listening, not every guest comes as prepared as Leah, but she gave me an entire document, like laid out all the numbers. I'm so, so grateful. So year one, 80,000, that's great. I mean, especially from, launching something brand new to the market that you're selling to, even though the IP is established, but to a brand new market and all of the startup endeavors to even get it, out there. From month 1 to month 12, you increased revenue from $2,868 in that first month to, by month 12, you were seeing about $10,563. So almost 270% growth. I'm curious, what do you feel was the biggest driver for this increase in growth? Was it the ads? Was it something different in terms of traffic source, or a strategy that actually had nothing to do with traffic? Like, I'm curious what you felt contributed most to that.
Yeah, I actually did not use cold traffic. I used pool audiences, so basically partner campaign, which is part of the method actually. Is just a little different because in the method I was teaching, this could be done through a webinar where you invite basically an audience from somebody else who has the same ideal client than you, but just not a competitor. And you run a live webinar pitching your method, like basically very like sales psychology infused. And during the webinar live and in the few days after that, you can make sales. In my case, I was running a webinar to another audience, but then I was taking on sales calls. So that adds another layer as well on conversion because it's not just immediate. I need to perform during the sales call. Fortunately, I was okay, it was good. My closing rate is actually pretty good, but I had to convince a potential partner that I could actually make it through the sales call. So it's not just like people show up and they can purchase right away. So this is when my revenue really started to increase. And actually, my ROI is very cool. When I looked at the numbers and analyzed it, I was like, I'm going to call this like the ripple ROI effect because you make minimal marketing efforts basically in three campaigns, meaning basically three webinars. I was able to close a lot of new clients, and the return on investment is where it gets beautiful, is that almost like 687% because it cost me in total.
To hear the rest of this episode and unlock weekly subscriber-only content and community access, join us as a premium subscriber at cubicletoceo.co/podcast. The link is below in our show notes.